The small village of Dalpa had always been the kind of place where people whispered instead of speaking, where honor was measured in coins and silence, and where the cries of the poor were drowned beneath the laughter of the wealthy. In this village, a girl named Amina grew up under the cracked roof of her father's mud house. She was 17, thin as a reed but sharp in spirit, her mind a spark hidden beneath ashes. She had always been different, eyes too observant, words too piercing, dreams too large for a place where women were trained only to fetch water, cook food, and survive until their youth was bartered away. Amina's family was poor, poorer than even the poorest in the village, for her father was a man of endless debts. He had once owned land, but his greed and gambling had eaten through every inch of it. What little he had left he sold in secret, and when there was nothing else, he sold his daughter. The night it happened, Amina overheard the whispers before she saw the truth. She had gone to fetch water from the well when she caught the sound of men's voices inside her home. One of them was her father, his tone sly, dripping with false pride. The other was deep, gruff, and carried the cold weight of authority. She froze in the shadows and listened. "She is strong," her father said. "She works like a mule. She is not soft like other girls. She can lift, she can run, she can hunt if trained. You will not regret it." The other man chuckled, low and menacing. "And what is your price, farmer?" Her father lowered his voice, but Amina still heard. 10 silver coins, that is all I ask. Enough to clear my debts for now." A pause. Then the sound of coins clinking. It struck her like a slap. She pressed her hand against her mouth, eyes stinging, throat burning. 10 silver coins. That was the price of her life. 10 coins to erase her father's mistakes. 10 coins to strip her of freedom. 10 coins to mark her as nothing more than property. When she finally dared to peer inside, she saw him, the man who had bought her. He was a hunter named Zaman, known in the region as a solitary figure who lived in the shadowy forests beyond the village. He was feared, not because he was cruel, but because he was unknown. He wore animal skins, carried weapons made of steel and bone, and his face was carved with scars from battles with beasts most men dared not name. Amina's father pushed her forward without shame when Zaman nodded. "Take her," he said. "She is yours now." That night, she left her home not as a daughter but as a possession. She did not cry. Her heart wanted to break, but something inside her had hardened. As she followed Zaman into the darkness of the forest, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back, she swore silently that one day she would never be owned again. One day, she would own more than anyone could imagine. The forest swallowed her whole. For days, she walked beside Zaman, who spoke little. His steps were long and swift, his eyes always scanning the trees as though danger lurked behind every shadow. At first, Amina thought he might kill her or abandon her, but instead, he put her to work. She carried firewood, fetched water from streams, skinned animals he hunted, and prepared food under his sharp instructions. Life with Zaman was not easy. He was not gentle. Nor was he cruel. He was simply a man of survival. He treated her not like a daughter, not like a wife, not even like a servant, but like a partner in training. Slowly, Amina began to learn. She learned how to track footprints in the dirt, how to listen for the snapping of twigs, how to climb trees and set traps. She learned which berries killed and which healed, how to strike a fire with 2 stones, and how to hold a bow steady even when her hands shook. At night, as she lay on the cold earth staring at the stars, she thought of her family. She thought of her father laughing as he took the silver. She thought of her mother's silence, of her brother's indifference. She thought of the humiliation of being sold like a goat. Each thought carved deeper into her soul a hunger, not for revenge alone, but for power, for wealth, for a place where no one could ever look down on her again. Seasons passed, and Amina's body grew stronger. Her arms carried weight with ease, her legs could outrun boys who had once mocked her. Zaman taught her to hunt deer, to skin wolves, even to face wild boars without trembling. But what he did not know was that Amina had a gift beyond survival. She had a mind built for strategy. She began to notice patterns. Where animals migrated, how rivers shifted, where hunters failed. She began to ask questions Zaman himself had never thought of. One day, when a pack of wolves threatened their camp, Amina devised a plan. Instead of fighting them head-on, she lured them with a trail of meat into a pit she had dug earlier. When the wolves fell in, Zaman looked at her with rare surprise. "You think like a leader," he muttered. That was the first compliment he had ever given her. But the true turning point came one stormy night when Zaman returned wounded from a hunt. His leg had been mauled by a bear, and he collapsed at the entrance of their shelter. Blood soaked the ground, and for the first time, Amina saw fear in his eyes. She could have left him to die. After all, he had bought her like a trinket, but she did not. Instead, she worked tirelessly, grinding herbs into poultices, stitching his wound with trembling hands, and nursing him through fevered nights. Weeks later, when he could walk again, Zaman looked at her not as property, but as something else entirely. "You saved me," he said. His voice was rough, but there was respect in it. "From now on, you are no slave. You are my equal." That declaration changed everything. From then on, Amina was no longer just learning, she was leading. Together, they hunted bigger game, traded furs and meat at nearby markets, and slowly built a reputation as a formidable pair. But Amina's vision reached farther than Zaman's. While he was content with survival and modest trade, she saw opportunity. She noticed how traders from distant lands paid double for rare pelts, how certain herbs fetched high prices when sold in the cities, how demand for iron tools and weapons never ceased. She began negotiating on their behalf, and to everyone's shock, this young woman who had once been sold for 10 silver coins outsmarted seasoned merchants. Her sharp tongue, fearless gaze, and unmatched intelligence earned her both respect and fear. Yet, deep inside, the wound of betrayal by her family never healed. Each coin she earned, each deal she struck, each new skill she mastered was one more step toward her vow. She would rise so high that those who had sold her would bow before her name. But fate was not finished with her yet, for while Amina had begun to carve her own path, a storm was gathering in the region, one that would test not only her strength, but her ability to transform from a survivor into something far greater. This was only the beginning of the girl who had been sold like an object, and who would one day become the richest woman in the region. Years slipped by like shadows across the mountains, and with them, Amina shed the skin of the frightened girl who had once been dragged from her father's house. The forest had carved her into something else entirely. She was no longer the property of a man, no longer a victim of betrayal. She was a woman who understood survival, trade, and power. Zaman, the hunter, grew older, slower, and quieter, but Amina's fire only burned brighter. Every journey into the markets revealed to her the same truth. The world was not kind to the weak, but it opened doors for the clever and relentless. while others haggled for scraps. Amina studied patterns. She listened to merchants boast of their caravans, noticed which goods disappeared first, and which shortages drove prices sky high. She began small. When she realized salt was scarce during the rainy season, she stored it early, then sold it at triple the price. When she saw how villagers paid fortunes for medicinal herbs, she learned how to cultivate them in secret corners of the forest. And when iron tools became scarce, she traded with blacksmiths directly, cutting out middlemen and keeping the profit for herself. Word spread quickly. The hunter's woman was no ordinary girl. Merchants who once sneered at her now bowed their heads when she entered the marketplace. She was fierce, her bargains ruthless, her intelligence unmatched. Zaman watched her with a mixture of pride and awe. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he said quietly, "You are no longer the girl I bought. You are a storm that cannot be caged." Amina looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "And yet, I was caged once. Never again." With her growing wealth, she began hiring men from the villages, not as servants, but as partners. Farmers who struggled to feed their families found employment under her. Young hunters, drawn by her reputation, offered loyalty in exchange for guidance. She paid them fairly, treated them with dignity, and in return, they gave her everything: strength, protection, and trust. Slowly, Amina built more than a business. She built an empire. She expanded beyond the forest. She established trade routes with distant towns, creating networks that connected resources no one else had thought to link. When drought struck villages, Amina had already stored grain. When floods destroyed crops, she sold food at prices people could afford, and in doing so, she won their loyalty. By the time she was 25, she was no longer spoken of as the hunter's woman. She was simply known as Amina of Dalpa, a name that carried both reverence and fear. Traders came to her instead of the markets. Rulers sent messengers seeking her counsel. And whispers began that she was becoming wealthier than the very landlords who once mocked her family's poverty. But destiny has a cruel way of circling back to the beginning. One summer afternoon, as Amina oversaw her caravans being loaded with goods, she noticed a group of ragged men kneeling before her guards. Their faces were gaunt, their clothes torn, their eyes hollow with desperation. And among them was a face she had not seen in years: her father. Her breath caught, but she did not move. Her father's once proud shoulders were hunched, his beard unkempt, his voice trembling as he called out, "Great Lady, mercy. Please, mercy." He did not recognize her at first. To him, she was a powerful woman surrounded by soldiers and merchants, her robes woven with threads of gold, her presence commanding silence. But when she stepped forward and lowered her veil, his eyes widened in shock. "Amina?" he whispered, disbelief choking his voice. "My daughter?" the crowd murmured. Soldiers tightened their grip on their spears. All eyes shifted between the broken man who had once sold his own child and the woman who now stood above him, richer than kings. Amina's heart was a storm. Memories of that night flooded back. The clinking of silver coins, her father's laughter, her mother's silence. She could almost taste the bitterness of betrayal on her tongue. Every instinct screamed to turn away, to remind him of the price he had once set on her life. But she had learned something in the forest, something Zaman had once told her. Power is not only in what you take. It is in what you give, when others expect you to destroy. Amina looked at her father, at the family who had abandoned her, and for a long moment, silence ruled the courtyard. Then she spoke, her voice clear and steady. "You sold me for 10 silver coins," she said. "That was all I was worth to you. Tonight, I could buy you your house and your land 100 times over. But I will not, because I am not you." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Her father fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Forgive me, child," he sobbed. "Forgive me." Amina did not smile, nor did she weep. Instead, she turned to her guards. "Give them food, clothes, and shelter. Let them live under my protection. But let it be known, loyalty is not bought with silver, it is earned with dignity." From that day forward, her family lived in her city, not as equals, not as rulers, but as people who survived only by her grace. Years passed, and Amina's wealth grew beyond measure. She built schools where girls could learn to read, because she knew what ignorance had cost her. She built hospitals so no one would bleed alone in the dirt. She built trade guilds that welcomed both men and women, shattering the chains that had once bound her. When she finally stood on the balcony of her great palace, overlooking the thriving city she had built with her own hands, the people below chanted her name. Not Zaman's, not her father's, hers. She had been sold for 10 silver coins. She had been discarded, forgotten, betrayed. But she had risen beyond every chain, every insult, every wound. Amina was no longer a victim. She was the richest woman in the region. A queen without a crown, a legend carved not by fate but by fire. And as she looked into the horizon, her voice carried across the wind like a promise: "Let no woman be silenced. Let no child be sold. Let no dream be buried. For I am Amina, and I will not be the last."